Hey everyone, welcome to Learn ReactJS for Frontend Development by CodeChef. And in today's lesson, we will be looking at arrow functions, which is an important ES6 feature which is used everywhere in React. Arrow functions helps you write cleaner, shorter code, which is required when working with callbacks like map, filter, and forEach. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how arrow functions work, and you can try out the practice problems yourself on the CodeChef platform. So let's begin.
So let us look at arrow functions. Arrow functions are a modern way to write functions in JavaScript. They were introduced in ES6 to make code shorter and easier to read. They are also used heavily in React and JavaScript. So let us have a look at our traditional function. So in our traditional functions, to define a function, you would have to use the keyword function. For example, let's say I have a simple addition function called add. I would have to use the keyword function in order to specify that it's a function, after which I would define the function in curly braces. And this syntax is longer, but it's very clear. But the issue is, when we use callbacks for map, filter, or forEach, we want the function to be as concise and short as possible, which is where arrow functions comes in. So in arrow function, the same addition function can be written using arrow syntax, which means the keyword function will be replaced by an arrow, which is basically an equals to and a greater than equal to sign. Let's say I want to define a function called addition. So how I would do is I would write const add equal to the parameters which would be taken as an input for this function, after which I would define what would be returned in curly braces, which would be a plus b. So in arrow functions, we can have implicit return, which means if a function returns only one expression, then we can remove the curly braces as well as the return keyword. So previously we saw that we had written a curly braces and a return keyword to return a plus b, but here we can ignore both since the function is returning only one expression. For example, let's look at the same addition function where instead of return a plus b in curly braces, I'll be simply writing a plus b, which will return the sum of the two numbers. So let's look at an example where there's only single parameter for the function. So when there is only one parameter, the parentheses are optional, that is, we need not give parentheses. For example, to find a square of a number, I can simply give const square equal to n, arrow mark n into n, which will return the square of the number n. So if one parameter is there, we can ignore the parentheses. But if there are no parameters, can we ignore the parentheses again? No. If there are no parameters, then the parentheses are required. That is, we'll be writing empty parentheses. So let's say I want to define a function which will return the string hi there. I will write const say hi equal to empty parentheses arrow mark hi there. So from this particular arrow function, the string hi there will be returned. So let's look at arrow functions and this. Traditional functions have their own this, which means the value of this depends on how the function is called. Arrow functions are different. They do not have their own this. Instead, arrow functions inherit this from the surrounding scope in which they are written. This behavior is extremely important in callbacks and in React, where functions are passed around frequently. This concept is known as lexical this. So let's look at when we should use arrow functions. We will use arrow functions when you're using short functions or callbacks. They work especially well with array methods like map, filter, and forEach, where the function is small and used only once. However, avoid arrow functions when working with constructors or object methods. In these cases, you usually need a dynamic this, which arrow functions do not provide.
So that was it for our introduction to arrow functions. This syntax is used heavily in modern JavaScript and React, which is why learning it is essential. And after this lesson, don't forget to head over to the CodeChef platform and try out the practice problems yourself. That is where the real learning happens. So that was it for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.